Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. We're glad you can join us. Autism Support of Alabama welcomes you. I am Shanique Jeffers. I am the program manager. We have on Jenny Morris, the managing director. We have Anna Maple, the development manager, and we have Jennifer Brunson, our developmental assistant. Once again, we welcome you to our first webinar Wednesday. Our topic for today is attending IEP meetings with confidence. Our presenter is Jennifer Ryan with Alabama Disabilities Advocacy Program, short for is ADAP. Before I introduce Jennifer, I would like to let you know that she will be taking questions towards her end of her presentation. You can ask your questions in the chat box. We welcome all questions. Feel free to ask anything that you would like to have more clarification on or know about. Enter those questions in the chat box. Jenny is a native of Hale County. She received her Bachelor's of Arts and Juris Doctorate from the University of Alabama. She previously served as a law clerk for former Chief Justice Sue Bell Cobb, while Judge Cobb was on the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals. She also spent a year as a law clerk for the magistrate judges of the U.S. District Court, Middle District of Alabama. She was also served in a private practice for a number of years with a focus on juvenile justice, family law, and appeals before joining ADAP in 2013. She leads ADAP's children advocacy team and specializes in special education law. She also serves as a director of the Children's Rights Clinic at the University of Alabama School of Law. Jenny enjoys being active in the community, is involved with both Tuscaloosa Children's Theater and Theater Tuscaloosa, where she has served in various executive positions on the board. We welcome Jennifer Ryan. I'm sorry, Jenny Ryan.
Hey, are you ready for me to go or no? Hold on. I don't hear anybody.
Jenny, you're in the webinar. We can hear you.
Shall I start?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Then I am going to share my screen. We're going to get started. Thank you for having me today. I thought this was a unique topic, but I understand it a lot too. A lot of times we have families that call us that have those self-advocacy skills and are ready to go into an IEP meeting, but their confidence may be a little low. And so hopefully some of the things that we'll talk about today will make you all realize that, yes, I do have those skills and I do now have that confidence to go in knowing that I have these self-advocacy skills. Main issues that we see for families is figuring out the evaluation and eligibility process. That can be something where you see numbers of days that a school has to get things done, but then you hear excuses and then you're unsure of whether that time has actually started or not. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're also going to talk about IEPs as a whole, and in particular, things to look out for if you see these types of things. I think it should put you on alert that perhaps you're going to have to speak up a little bit more during that IEP meeting than you probably went in wanting to. Sometimes you'll get a great draft and you'll go in and there won't be a whole lot that you need to add, but a lot of times that isn't the case. And then also, I want to talk a little bit about prior written notice, or the piece of paper that you get that talks about notice of intent. So we'll try to hit on all three of those today. So first, these wonky time frames for evaluation. The biggest to me is that the first time frame that the school has is that when a parent asks for them to evaluate a child, or when anyone asks for a child to be evaluated, the law is that they begin the process in a timely manner. Well, a timely manner doesn't give specific date amounts, right? So that's always one of those things where a parent may be like, well, has enough time passed? Should I bring this back up again? And I will say that what we generally do is, first of all, if you ask for an evaluation, do it in writing. In fact, I say do it in emails so that you have a place you can go back to and document that you made that request. But within that letter or email, I suggest that you ask that the school get back to you within 10 days to set up the meeting to determine if they're going to evaluate. And so 10 days to get back with you. I would say 30 days to set up that meeting for you to sign the paperwork that he or she will be evaluated. Once we get past that initial meeting of yes, the child is going to be evaluated, then we've got time for the school to do the evaluations. And once they start that, there is 60 days for them to complete all of those evaluations. So 60 days from that initial meeting. Then once they've done that, there's another 30 days after completing the test for them to determine eligibility. So looking back over the test and determining whether the scoring from those tests meets the requirements for eligibility. That is a meeting. The 30 days to determine eligibility, there is a meeting for everybody to discuss whether the child is eligible or not. And once that occurs, there's actually another 30 days that they get to implement the IEP. Oftentimes, I will go in to that eligibility meeting, though, and ask for us to write up the IEP on that day. It doesn't hurt to ask. It never hurts to ask, right? And it does get done sometimes. So be confident in asking for it, even if they say, well, we're not ready today, but maybe it'll push them along to come back within 7 to 10 days rather than 30. It is not wrong at all to ask for that, even though they have, under law, this ability for it to be another 30 days. So things that, yes, need to happen after a referral is made for special education. The parents do have to sign the consent for evaluation, even if you were the one that asked for the child to be evaluated. They've still got to get that on paper. The evaluations have to be completed within 60 days of that initial meeting. And like I said, eligibility determined by the 90th day, so another 30 days, and then another 30 days after that to implement the IEP. Things that are a no, just providing rights is not enough. And plus, that's just a big old packet of paper. Um, Another thing is saying, well, let's consider 4504 instead. You can actually have evaluations for both going on at the same time. So saying, well, let's do this other thing first, isn't necessary if what you want is for your child to be evaluated to determine if they actually qualify for an IEP. And then the last thing that just sticks in my craw is saying, well, we've never done services before. Why don't we try the problem solving team first? Um, again, they can be doing that at the same time that they're evaluating, but that isn't something that should stop the process of evaluating for an IEP from going forward. These are not things that should be happening and stopping the process of evaluating for an IEP. Another thing that happens is if a child or if a parent comes to the school and says, I am worried about my child's behavior. Sometimes that child may only be evaluated for behavior, or we come and say, I am worried about their reading, and we don't check all of these other areas. And so maybe ADAP comes in, or some other advocate or yourself comes in a few months later and goes, well, why haven't we looked at behavior? We want to get all of those evaluations done up front. And I also want us to consider that behavior doesn't mean necessarily disciplinary problems. Behaviors can be things like not wanting to get out of the car at the school. That's not a violation of any school code, but it's obviously a problem that's preventing the child from being able to access their education. And so we can have a behavior plan that helps us to figure out a way to make our way into the school door and access our education without us saying that there is some sort of disciplinary problem. We may have a behavior of needing our food warmed at lunch. Obviously, not a code section issue, but perhaps needs to be within a behavior plan. Either we're working on being able to eat what everyone else is eating, but also that we are making sure that a child is eating throughout the day. So if the only way that we can get them to eat is to warm the food, then we can write that into a plan. But the biggest thing is that we get the evaluation of all areas of suspected disability evaluated. So transitional, we're going to be talking about transitioning into high school. So an elementary or transitioning from high school into adulthood. So elementary school, we're not going to be worried as much on that one. Right. So moving on to talk about IDEA, were laws that allow us to have an IEP in place. In order to have an IEP, you do have to fall under one of these 13 specific areas and also need specially designed instruction. So you could have a child that has a diagnosis that falls under one of these areas, but if they're still able to access their curriculum without any need for specially designed instruction, then they may not qualify for an IEP. Now, specially designed instruction does not have to be reading, writing, arithmetic, though. It doesn't have to just be those academics. You may need specially designed instruction for behavior. You may need to have other services, specially designed instruction on handwriting. Let's say that would fall under OT services. You may need adapted PE in some fashion. That wouldn't be specially designed instruction as well. So considering needing those services or some sort of change in the curriculum for a child on top of falling under one of these 13 areas is necessary. Again, educational performance means academic, social, emotional, and or communication. So that's why we have a lot of speech therapy availability. I think for almost every school district, that is the service that is most easily identifiable as something that can be added in for a child to receive at school. But beyond academics, both those communication skills and social emotional are areas that a school should be addressing if necessary. So we have IEPs under the IDEA in order to provide or make sure that FAPE is provided to all of our children. So what is FAPE? It's a free, appropriate public education. So free is no cost to you. Appropriate is the one I think ties people up the most. It's an education that is tailored to your child's needs, but it does not mean the best education. Frankly, the way that I sometimes refer to it is adequate, because that's an A as well. So free, appropriate, or adequate public education. And then in the IEP, we're going to have a lot of goals listed, generally one for each area that we have concerns about. Those goals can't just be willy-nilly. They've got to be a statement of measurable annual goals. And they've got to address both academic and function. So the way to remember this is the acronym SMART, which is the goal needs to be specific, it needs to be measurable, big one, it needs to be attainable. We don't want to write a goal that a child is not going to be able to attain and that somebody isn't going to work on because they don't believe that the child can attain it. It needs to be relevant. So it needs to be something that is going to be helpful for the child to learn. And then it needs to be time-based, meaning that the goal needs to be completed in a specific amount of time, which is generally the school year, and can have benchmarks of places that we are trying to get to throughout that school year. Here's a big one. What should the IEP contain? And I've actually got 2 slides on this. So do not fear, this page is not the only one. We're going to go through several. So first, there needs to be a description of what's happening currently for the child, both academically and functionally. All of that needs to be included in those first few pages of the IEP. And we're going to actually look at one that isn't the greatest IEP in the world. And we're going to go through and sort of pick out parts that aren't done well. Next is goals that are measurable and how we're going to measure them. That's really important for that to be in there with the goal as well. Also, what services are going to be provided to help the child meet those goals. This includes related services and the supplementary aids and services like occupational therapy, OT, speech therapy, assistive technology falls in that area. And if there's the need for paraprofessional help, sometimes referred to, if we're talking about behavior, as registered behavior technicians, individuals of that nature that can provide more help, either one-on-one or in a setting in a classroom for several children to be able to access that paraprofessional. Well, I said I had 2. Did I remove a page? Can I go back? Okay. Maybe I removed it. Okay, members of the IEP team. The parent, obviously, there's a reason that y'all are listed as a 1 in the IEP meeting when we're starting to list who all is there and signing the signature page. It's hugely important that the parent be a member of the IEP team. Can the IEP be written without the parent there? Yes, if they have been given notice of the meeting and the parents indicated that they're not coming or the school has not heard back from them. If an IEP happens and you weren't able to attend, it doesn't mean that you can't call another meeting, though. You can call a meeting at any time that you think there needs to be something discussed about the IEP. Secondly, someone that gets forgotten sometimes to be invited to these meetings is the child when it's appropriate. Um, Generally, this is probably going to be 8th grade and above, but if you have a child in middle school who's really interested in attending the meeting, it's not inappropriate for them to be there. I've also had parents where we had several IEP meetings for a particular child. There were a lot of people around the table making decisions for that child that didn't have regular connections with that child. So people from the main office, myself as an attorney for the family, did not see the child often. And so the parent requested that before the meeting began, that the child come to the meeting and say hello, so that when the meeting started, the focus was on that child. I've also had parents to bring a picture of their child to sit on the table during an IEP meeting to make sure that the team remembered to focus on the child throughout the IEP meeting. So those are all appropriate. You also need a gen ed teacher and the SPED teacher at the table. The general education teacher, it's not necessarily every single class that the child is in, but at least one gen ed teacher needs to be there. And the special education teacher is usually the case manager for the child as well. They need to be there. Also need someone that is a representative of the local education agency. It could be the principal, but you can also ask the special education coordinator for your district to be there. They're going to be someone that has ability to know what's going on with money in the district and be able to okay something like an extra adult in the classroom. Related service providers, particularly at annual meetings where you are discussing the services for the next year and how much of that service your child should be receiving, invite them to the meeting. If you're concerned the school hasn't invited them and you think it's really important for them to be there, invite them to the meeting. I'm having a meeting tomorrow where we're having the transportation department show up to the meeting. They don't generally come, but we've invited them to be at the meeting tomorrow because of the transportation issues that we're having at the moment. And then anyone else with special knowledge or expertise. So you could invite in an advocate. You can invite a doctor who may be interested in coming to the meeting with you. When we're talking about older kids, inviting voc rehab to be at the table is important. So those all can be members of the IEP team. All right, so we are talking about specially designed instruction when we're talking about special education. And adopting as appropriate to the needs of an eligible child. Both things like methodology, the delivery of the instruction, content, all of those things, but they need to be addressed to the unique needs of your child. And they need to ensure access of your child to the general curriculum so that they can meet the educational standards of the state of Alabama and your local jurisdiction, if there's anything different than what the state requirements are, that apply to all children. So in the state of Alabama now, we no longer have like a certificate of attendance. Every single child needs to get 24 credits in order to receive a diploma. Now there are different diploma criteria. There's 3 different diploma tracks. There's the gen ed, there is the life skills, and then there is the alternative standards. Those are the three. But even if you are on alternative standards, you still have to have 4 Englishes, 4 sciences, 4 maths, 4 social studies. The content of those classes just may be different for a child that's on those alternative standards. And also the essential life skills track, those are going to be a little different as well, though a child on essentials can also take gen ed classes. But it's really important to remember that we are working towards educational goals no matter what diploma track we are on. And our specially designed instruction is to help us to earn those credits. Okay, so maybe I just put this in here twice. So we've already gone over this slide of what must an IEP contain. There's the second page. Okay. So statement of any modifications to the program or supports for school personnel should also be a part of what the IEP should contain. Also, any explanation that's necessary, where the child will not participate with non-disabled children. So an explanation of the amount of time that they may be going to the resource room. What are we going to be doing when we're in the resource room? It's not just that they're going to go to the resource room for an hour a day. It's that we're going to work on these specific reading goals during that time. If we write out that we are coming out and not participating with non-disabled children for any of those particular amounts of time. Individual accommodations that are necessary also need to be written into the IEP. And that's why there's not a separate 504 plan, because essentially you are encompassing the 504 accommodations that you would get with a 504 by putting them into the IEP in the area where we're talking about accommodations. Those accommodations can be both for all classes, all school time, but also there's a separate box for assessments. So if you need different accommodations for taking assessments, those would go into a particular box within the IEP as well. And then the dates that the services are going to occur. And usually that's going to be August 9th through May 15th, whatever the period of time is for the school year. And you need to have another IEP meeting within a year of when you wrote the last IEP. So a lot of times we'll have an IEP meeting around April 15th to write our IEP for the next school year. Even though it says this IEP is going to be in place from, well, a lot of them will do April 15th, but usually it's these services will be provided August 9th through of 2024 through May 15th of 2025. We still have to come back before April 15th of 2025 to write the IEP for the 25-26 year. So even though we haven't finished up and completed the full services for this school year, we're going to have to come back and write the annual IEP for the next year with a few weeks remaining in the school year in order to get it in place for the next school year. So we'll be making a few assumptions and projections about the rest of the school year, those last few weeks when writing the IEP for the next school year. And then I wanted to touch just briefly on behavior intervention plans, because this is something that I often don't see when maybe it could be helpful, or I do see them, but they're just a flimsy piece of paper that doesn't really indicate what could be helpful for the child. Part of that is that the IDEA doesn't provide really great guidance on behavior intervention plans. But at the minimum, they need to have the goals that we want achieved. There needs to be attention to planned activities. We need to know who's responsible for implementing the plan. Is it just going to be the resource teacher, or are we going to have everyone that comes into contact with this child in the school know about this plan so that they are able to implement it as well? We need to know timelines followed and what exactly is the plan for intervention. Related services that you should consider, or the IEP team should consider if you think these are important, they need to be addressed within the IEP: transportation, speech, psychological services, including counseling, can be, for a lot of school districts, can be provided in the school. Any PT or OT, uh, recreational education. So if a child can still access the typical PE, they still may need a goal written in, or there might need to be some accommodations that allow for them to. That can be within the IEP, whatever service it is they need to be able to access it. Or you may decide that what you need is adaptive PE instead. We talked about counseling, orientation and mobility services. So maybe you have a child that is blind and walks with a cane, or is learning to walk with a cane. Those services are available through a school system. Typical health services also available, as well as social work services. And I can't see what the last one says, but I hope y'all can read it. It's something about parents, but I have a box that's over it at the moment. Maybe parent, uh, just let y'all read it and I'll move on. This is something that will build confidence in any meeting that you go to. This is our book, Right Not a Favor, that will walk you through all sorts of things that may come up during the IEP process. Feel free to scan that right now. Scan the QR code from your phone. There's also at the bottom the actual spot that you can go to on the internet to get it. You can also just go to our webpage, ADAP, then go over to the children's section, then scroll down. Eventually you will find it. But uh, I highly suggest using the QR code there. Right now, we don't have any physical copies of A Right Not a Favor to send to parents. But if you go to our website, you can see both the full book, which is over 100 pages. So, and it's color. So if you're using a printer with all sorts of color cartridges, I would say turn it to black and white if you're going to print this out. But also understand it is over 100 pages. So don't just hit print before thinking about it. But we have things in chapters. So you can either print the entire thing or print a specific chapter that you feel is important for you. But this is free of charge to print it. And if we had any physical ones to hand out, those would be free as well. Hopefully we will get some in the near future and be able to start passing those out again. But the cost of them at the moment is a bit prohibitive. We are also in the process of having this translated into Spanish so that we can provide for families that may have English as a second language in their home. So that's where we are on the book right now. Hopefully you've had a chance to see the QR code. So I'm going to move on now. Right, so I wanted us to look at an IEP that is not far off from a typical IEP that I may walk into, where the parent hasn't had much assistance in the past, but feels like something isn't exactly right within the IEP. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Marcus first. Marcus, his mom's tried to get services in the past. He had good grades at the time, and so the school just told mom not to worry about it. They didn't have a meeting to decide whether they were going to evaluate him or not. Um, as things have moved along for Marcus, as he's moved along in school, he got held back at some point. That still didn't set off any bells to the school. Um, he has started having a lot of behavior problems at school. And now he's in seventh grade. He is, I believe, for this one, 2 years, he's been held back twice. And we're at an IEP meeting. He's actually in sixth, about to go to seventh. We're at an IEP meeting for the next year. And this is the draft IEP that's been presented to mom. So I guess my first question is if anybody sees anything wrong to start off with. You could put it in the chat box, maybe. Can I see the chat box? Okay. Well, since I don't see anything in the chat box, and yes, we can share the PowerPoint after. Sorry, I just saw the chat message. So that'll be fine. I'm gonna point out some issues that I see with this IEP. First of all, strengths of student are really important. Particularly if you have a child that can read over what his IEP says. This doesn't say just give me a paragraph about the child. It is asking for strengths, and that is what should be there. What we have here is some backhanded compliments about Marcus. Marcus is smart enough to do better in school than he is. That's not a strength. Just say Marcus is smart if you think Marcus is smart. Then they say if Marcus listened better and stayed in class, then his peers would like him more. That is not a strength at all. Um, yeah, whatever Marcus's strengths are, that is what should be written here. So peers like Marcus in times when they are able to interact outside of class would be appropriate to put there. Next would be the parental concerns. Every parent should receive parental concerns before the IEP meeting. They should get a paper that's sent to them from the school for you to write down what it is that you have concerns about. And don't worry about the size of a box. Whatever concerns you have, write them all out and send them in to the case manager for them to figure out how to fit it within the IEP. They can attach extra pages, that's fine. But you want to make sure that all of your concerns get addressed within that IEP meeting. This is an area where you can be completely confident that this is your time to really lay out problems that you are seeing. For this IEP meeting, they just took what the mom had said the year before rather than sending out to the parent what it was that she had concerns about and wanted to be handled. So make sure this is really, really important for you to list all those things. And request that you have, it is appropriate for you to list those and let them end up within this parental concerns area. I don't think anything can be too specific to go into that area. So consider doing that. I think the student preferences area is okay if those are truly things that they have asked Marcus about for this year and didn't just copy from the year before. So there should be some discussion between Marcus and his case manager about what things Marcus has interest in and things that he prefers. It shouldn't just be um, picking stuff that the teacher thinks would be appropriate in there. I'm not moving on to the next page. All right, here we go. Results of most recent evaluations. So Marcus is still making B's in classes when he is there. Don't need that last part. Also, I suppose you could consider evaluating current work as an evaluation, but it should be more specific in there. Looking at Marcus's current work, he has B's in the majority of his classes. Then there was discussion about the areas where he was eligible next. So he's eligible under OHI. Then there's more observations listed here. Observations are okay for evaluations, but I think it needs to be language that is not as, I don't know, the language just isn't helpful. The language needs to be helpful and not derogatory. I think some of the language here is derogatory. I think it's okay to point out that he had verbal altercations and physical altercations if we are going to then discuss later how we are going to take on those challenges and not just use them as ways, our only ways of describing Marcus. If it's listed here, then it needs to be addressed further in the IEP. Academic, developmental, and functional needs of the student. This is asking for needs, and needing to pay attention more is not a need of Marcus. That's really more a need of the teacher. So what Marcus needs is he needs solutions for these issues. He needs to have things in place like a behavior plan to help him to be able to focus in class more. Those sorts of things can be listed within the IEP. And then they talk about how he's had suspension so far this year, and he's had an altercation with the SRO. Both of those things should lead to something more being discussed within the IEP. Should he have contact with the SRO? Frankly, if you have a behavior plan in place, that is suggesting that if there is a behavior occurring, the appropriate people to handle that are the people that have a copy of the IEP plan and not an SRO. However, I know that's not the way the real world works. And so I've had an ongoing discussion with people in the past about whether an SRO should have access to the behavior plan or not because of the amount of contact that they may come into contact with your child, especially if your child is going to become if their behaviors are going to become more elevated, if they're touched by someone, or if they're spoken to in a certain manner, if we may see that we get worse behaviors from the child. If you are not able to keep the SRO away from having interaction with the child, you might seriously consider for your specific set of circumstances whether the SRO should know, hey, don't touch my child, even if it's to give them a hug, because that isn't helpful for my child. You've just got to determine that. as far as the 11 days of suspension, that should let us all know this child should actually have a manifestation determination meeting anytime that the school wants them to miss another day of school. That should not be happening unless the manifestation meeting occurs. And then another thing to look at, does the student have behavior which impedes his or her learning or the learning of others? I often see this one checked, but not have a behavior intervention plan checked afterwards. Now, perhaps not every situation does require a behavior intervention plan, but I do think it is something to consider if the school does believe your child has a behavior which impedes their learning, whether it's not focusing in class or sleeping in class. I know a lot of schools feel like, well, what am I supposed to do if the child falls asleep in my class all the time? How am I supposed to address that in behavior intervention plan? Well, one of the big things about a behavior intervention plan is determining why the behavior is occurring. Is it because they are attempting to avoid the work? Because if so, that tells us a lot of other things. Like maybe the work is too difficult and they need help in reading. And instead of helping them in reading, they're sleeping in order to avoid figuring out or to avoid being called on for something that they don't have the answer to. There's a whole lot going on there if that's the case, and that could be addressed within a behavior intervention plan. Also, transportation is really important to address. Even if you are dropping your child off every day in the car, they are going to need transportation for field trips in all likelihood. Do they need to have extra assistance? Do they need preferential seating when they are on the bus? Are they going to need an aid if they are on the bus? As a result, we still need to go ahead and talk about transportation now, even if you are consistently driving them to and from school. It still needs to be addressed in here. Okay, so some other scenarios. I told the school I wanted to have Simone evaluated, and they told me they didn't think she needed any special services. Is that appropriate? Is that an appropriate response from the school? It is not. If you tell the school that you want your child evaluated, then there needs to be a meeting to determine whether they are going to evaluate. They should not brush you off once you make that request. But I do think it's important, like I said earlier, that you document it in some fashion. I suggest email. Next scenario, the school said it doesn't have someone on contract during the summer to do an evaluation, so it's going to evaluate Nicolette at the start of the school year. If you make a request, those times start once that request is made. Now, we also get that in a timely manner language, and that's where we would sort of get a little funkiness, I guess, with the school and what they consider timely for that initial meeting. But once you do have that initial meeting, those timelines start, even if it's summer. I will say this, for behavior goals and behavior observations, those are going to be difficult without observing the child around other students. We do want to have a plan in place that is helpful. And so making those observations over summer may be difficult, but if your child is in some sort of summer camp that they could be observed at, or if there's a time over summer where there is summer school for maybe reading and you're going to access that, that's a time that they can be observed. I do recommend making the request for evaluation, before summer starts, at the beginning of the school year. Right now, if you think your child needs an evaluation, go ahead and do it now. It is more difficult to get them completed over summer. However, there are still requirements in place that it get done, and they should not just be dismissive and say can't do it right now, especially if it's something like a test that the child can take that they would be taking on their own anyway. If you're doing evaluations regarding intellectual disability or specific learning disability, those can be done easily over the summer. Antoine is very smart and gets good grades. The school says he doesn't need any special services because he's so smart, but he gets in trouble practically every day. Sounds to me like Antoine could be evaluated to see if he qualifies for behavioral services. So just because a child is really smart doesn't mean that they don't qualify for an IEP. In fact, you could have a child that is considered twice exceptional. They could be in a gifted program, but still require IEP services as well. That is possible. So just because a child has all A's and is considered really smart doesn't mean that they still wouldn't qualify for special services because of a particular area, especially if it's outside of academics. Justin's behavior in school has been much better since he started taking medication. So they tell me there's no need for him to get any special help. We don't know just where better falls on a spectrum of, good. And we also don't know if, Justin could access things even better if he had those accommodations or services in place, particularly a behavior intervention plan. So the medication may be helping, but there could also be help from a behavior intervention plan. And if you get a great enough plan, maybe Justin doesn't need as much medication anymore either. And Justin's not going to be able to be on the same medication for forever. At some point, things are going to change. Doctors are going to try different levels of medication. They may try different medication altogether. And so it's important for the protections to be in place for Justin moving forward. School calls me all the time telling me that Sam is having trouble behaving. They tell me to come get him and bring him home. Those are suspensions. Whether they don't call them that, they are. And once you get to 10 days, your child, if they have a disability, is entitled to a manifestation determination meeting, 504 or IEP, in place. So those disciplinary issues may be related to your child's disability. And if they are, what should be occurring is a behavior plan being put in place, changes to the behavior plan that is already in place, looking back over the IEP and services to see if there's anything that can be changed, not just sending child home all the time. Tips on navigating the process. Keep good records. Keep really good records. The last evaluation your child had is going to be within the last 3 years. Make sure you keep that noted so that you've got all the testing that was done. Look back over it, see if all the testing was done. Prepare for your meetings. Request that you get a draft IEP a week ahead. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen, but ask. It doesn't hurt to ask. Ask your child what they think that they need in order to help them do better at school, and bring that into the meeting on behalf of your child. Be active in the meetings. Don't feel like you can't say anything. You absolutely can. If you don't agree it is okay to sign the IEP because that is to say, I was here. But you also can ask to add a piece of paper at the end that says, I don't agree with what the team decided. If you don't do it, it is not the end of the world, though. You can do it later. And then don't let up after the IEP. Once you've got the annual IEP in April and school starts in August, and suddenly a service that was put in place you don't feel great about, you don't have to wait until April to say, you know what we did last year, I don't think worked. Call an IEP meeting right now. Go back in and say, you know what, I know we're trying this. We've tried it for 6 weeks. I don't think it's working. Can we change this? That's perfectly fine. And reaching out to ADAP, feel free. You can contact us by email, by phone, or an online intake form where you can write out all the information and include a copy of the current IEP and behavior intervention plan. And somebody will be back with you. I think it's 7 days. Somebody will definitely be back in touch with you. I think it's far before that. I think usually you hear back within 48 hours. You get an intake appointment. If it's regarding education, it'll be with someone from the children's advocacy team. The services we provide are a lot of informational talks. We would talk one-on-one about some of these things. We can talk about referrals to other services. Add to you. So before you go into IEP meeting, we can hype you up so you're ready to go in with everything fresh on your mind. And in some cases, we can provide case representation, although we cannot take every case that's called into us. Pretty much, I am the only attorney actively having special education cases in case representation all the time. We have a number of advocates that do as well. We have other attorneys on our children's team, but a lot of them are doing systemic litigation rather than individual litigation. I cannot be everywhere at once. Obviously, our advocates can't either. Zoom has helped out a lot. If you're having IEP meetings that are available via Zoom and we can attend that way, it's more likely that we can. And I'm asking you all too, when you get a copy of this PowerPoint, if you will consider going to our priority setting survey. We set our new priorities in October of every year, so we are coming up on finalizing those within September. Any help that you could give us by putting in information of what you would like to see us focus on next year would be incredibly helpful to us. So I believe that is it, and I am going to now turn it over for me to ask questions. I know there were a lot in the chat box earlier, and I have not looked at any of them.
Okay, yes, we do have a couple of questions in the question and answer area.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is, why does Alabama choose exit for special education at the age of 21 and not 22 like in other states?
I don't know. That's gonna. I think it's through your 21st birthday, though, not that you are done at the age of 21, but like through your 21st year of life, which it may just be different wording from other states. Do you think it's that once the day you turn 21 that you cannot access education anymore? Because I think it's if you are in school when you turn 21, I think you can finish out the school year.
Yes, you can finish it out, but after that,
You're done. It's whatever the law. So there's the federal law, and Alabama's generally not going to do any more than what the federal law requires. Some states and other places are much more keen to providing services beyond what the federal law requires. I guess that would be the answer if another state is providing it longer than Alabama is.
Okay, the next question I have is how advanced should the IEP draft be sent to the parents and what to do if you don't get it in advance?
Yeah. I recommend asking for it a week before. But I've had parents not get a draft at all. Um, it's going to be up to you and your specific situation and whether you think canceling the IEP and rescheduling is the best option or going ahead to that IEP meeting, even though you haven't had enough time to go over it. And going to that meeting, expressing your displeasure for anything that you don't agree with, calling us afterwards, or someone that, some sort of advocate to look over it and see the things you don't agree with. I mean, ultimately, whether you have seen it or not, if you disagree with something, you can still file, a state complaint or due process complaint, based on your disagreements with it. You can also call another IEP meeting.
Okay, it says access to general curriculum. What does this look like for elementary age child who is nonverbal, has autism diagnosis, and developmental delay? How do you know if they're receiving this?
Well, it should be in the IEP how much time they are either in the resource room or in the gen ed classroom. So you'll see something like if a child is mostly in the gen ed classroom, that's considered an O1. That's 80 to 100% of the time. If they're mostly in the resource room, but not there all the time, it might be the one that's like 40 to 79. Then there's one from that, uh, that's down from that where you might be going to lunch with your peers in elementary school, PE with your peers. You might go in and push into the gen ed classroom for things like reading circle, um, particularly for grades like kindergarten, first grade. Having that playtime in the room with your peers, sitting and listening to books being read if you're able to do that. Those are all appropriate times to be in the gen ed classroom. I think for kindergarten, if a child is able to in their typical kindergarten room, even though they may not read or do math, most of kindergartners don't anyway. So if it's like toilet training hasn't happened, but they're pretty much behaviorally wise, consistent with the other kindergartners, it they should be in the gen ed classroom. Obviously, when we get to Alabama history in fourth grade, if you're able to sit there and listen to the teacher's instruction, even if you're not able to read, I still think it makes sense for you to be able to sit there and listen to the instruction about Alabama history. So it's really whether the child is getting education out of the setting at that time. Hope that answered it.
Okay, related services. I saw counseling listed. Can you elaborate on what this looks like? Is it one-to-one, group setting? Can a parent request this? Is it the same as Thrive that some schools offer?
Not sure what Thrive is, but if it's the community mental health service coming into a school and providing services there, that's typically what I mean by counseling. So it can be group, but it is usually individual if it is coming in from that outside source. It can be whatever the parent and the school agree to, though. And if it's an outside provider, what they would agree to. Typically in the school districts around, I'm in Tuscaloosa. So in the school districts around here, our community health, mental health, does go into the schools and see kids individually, but you have to be on their roster as a child that receives their services at the school. And if you do receive your community mental health services in the school, you cannot access those counseling services outside of the school. So you can't go to the community mental health center and get them at the school. The school is basically your place that you receive them.
Um, are there any resources for parents to understand IEP writing, YouTube books, or anything that you would recommend?
So I would recommend a Right Not a Favor. Again, I do think it's really helpful. There's a lot of example letters in the back. There's example IEPs. I would also say rights law books. That's WRIGHT apostrophe S law, rights law. Um, they have some books, and they have some chapters that are just available online if you look around. They have both online versions and hardback versions. I teach a class at the School of Law, and I use those books, even though they're meant for parents to access. I use them to teach my students who are then going to go help parents with special education law. So, yeah, I would recommend those.
Okay. How do I prevent the school from removing services such as speech or OT as she or he gets older? It happens often in my child's school.
So this is an area I did not talk about before, and I said I was going to go to. So I appreciate you bringing this up. There must be a notice to you written by the school if they are changing a service. The prior written notice or notice of intent is about intending to change what that service is. You want that in writing, and there should be a reason for that change written into that. If nobody gives you something like that, you should then write to the coordinator for your district and ask for the special education coordinator for your district and ask for prior written notice or notice of intent. And once that is written out, then you are in a position to file a state complaint to say, I don't agree with the reason that they changed this service. If it's just that my child has gotten older, that's not a legitimate reason. If your child still needs that amount of services, it should be written. Now, you as a parent and the school may realize at some point, like if you're at high school and previously you had 2 hours of help in the resource room a day, but your child needs to get so many credits during the school year, and you don't know how they're going to access all of the credits that they need and get all of that help, you may decide to reduce the service time. But that's probably not happening in elementary or middle school, right? That's going to be more of a thing to think about at high school, where you may decide to supplement those services outside of school time with private services in some way. But if it's happening in elementary or middle school, or if it's something where you have not agreed, make sure that you get the prior written notice or notice of intent, whatever they call it in your district. Because and then feel free to call an advocate, call us. That is something that will be helpful to them in determining what to do moving forward for you.
Okay. How often does the behavioral plan should get reviewed if there are no problems?
So it is up to the team. We usually start off asking for a review every 6 weeks for a new behavior plan. But if there are no issues after a certain period of time, I would suggest coming up with a time for that behavior plan to be reviewed, whether it's, you know, once every 9 weeks, something of that nature, I think is an appropriate amount of time. But if you feel like just once a semester is fine, that's okay too.
Okay, can you change your child's level before the next IEP meeting, like percentage in the special education class or general education class?
No, you're going to have to do it through the IEP meeting.
So you would need to ask for another IEP meeting
Yeah.
to ask for those changes.
Now, the school might agree to trying something new and letting the child remain in the resource room for longer or pushing them into the gen ed room more than they had before. But for it to be a change that can be, you know, fully accepted, there needs to be an IEP meeting. And if you really want that thing to happen, I would suggest asking for an IEP meeting as soon as possible because it may take, a week or two to get it set.
Okay, I think we have touched on all of the questions. I would like to say that we have the care binder where you can keep all your IEP documents in it, and you can go onto our website to and fill out the form and send that form into us, and the care binder will be mailed directly to you. The forms are now on the website, so you can go and fill out that form and send it to us, and where you keep the previous IEPs and compare them. So make sure they're not copy and pasting. So we would like to have Anna come on next. We would just like to say thank you, Jenny. Thank you for being with us for our first webinar Wednesday.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate y'all having me. And seriously, call ADAP if you have any kind of questions. Self advocacy skills is our biggest thing that we like to do. So, giving you that confidence going into your IEP meeting is something we would be happy to help with.
All right. Thank you all for joining us for our first webinar Wednesday through the Autism Support of Alabama. We are really excited to start doing this more. And thank you so much, Jenny, for joining us and letting us utilize our mission by spreading as much awareness and information that we can to families at little to no cost. So this is really wonderful. I hope that everyone got some great and useful information. We do have the resource PowerPoint. It's linked under the resources tab. Go to documents and you can download that. And if you have any other questions, you guys just go to our website. It is also on the resource tab under our links. So you can just click there. And we will do our best to get back to you and answer any questions and just keep up with our different events. We'd love to have everybody there, and I hope to help more people over time, events, fundraisers, and these webinars. So thank you, Jenny.